Hello, I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today we discuss what teens think about drugs and alcohol. When it comes to the prevention of high-risk behavior, the media and the message have to make sense to teens. We'll take a deep dive into what Iowa teens are thinking with Savanah Strahan from YSS, because she's going to join us to share her perspective on connecting with teens. Welcome to Surviving Bad. Savanah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter. As mentioned, my name is Savanah Strahan. I work for YSS, and I'm one of our lead specialized prevention services coordinator. And I'm also the youth coordinator for AC4C. As part of my job with YSS, I'm going into various different school districts in Story County, teaching wide variety of different curriculums specifically focused on substance use prevention. And we have curriculums currently grades 3 going all the way up to 12th grade.
You know, we have a lot of people involved with prevention in the state, but there's a trend that we see, and it's an important one, is that those of you, the professionals we ask to connect with teens these days, are younger, as you are. How does that sort of fit into the mission at YSS and what you're doing to sort of embrace a younger audience, and why is that?
Yeah, I think me being a younger adult helps make that connection with the youth. Sometimes I feel like they look at me as like an older sister or even like an mentor, where it's not like I'm an older adult. And so they gain that trust in the way I teach comes across differently, I would like to say, than most of their teachers. It's not like I'm there to say the same thing that their teachers are talking about. It's just a new face, and hopefully they gain some knowledge from me and think about things in a different perspective.
Now, one thing we've noticed in our work is that when it comes to teens, especially, either being a young adult, or being a grandfatherly type inspires them to be more open with you and more sharing on what they feel. But this world has changed. In the world I grew up in, the last decade, we've really seen an emphasis on getting input from teens on what we do, as opposed to just there being the output to teens. And so you starting out in this profession, how does that look to you as a young adult? Is that something you feel is comfortable, good, and one thing that fits in with your career goals?
Yeah, definitely right now for my career, I love working with the youth. I love hearing their perspective. And another thing with YSS is I've had the opportunity to even work with youth who are in treatment. They've been through the struggle of addiction. And so hearing from their perspective opens my eyes even more, seeing youth who do struggle even at a young age. It's not just in adults we see addiction happening, it's definitely happening at younger ages. And so when they give me info, I like to bring that back into the schools as well, because sometimes I feel like youth in the school districts don't always have that interaction with people who do struggle with addiction. So I sometimes tie those stories to them, saying, look, this does happen to youth. You might think it doesn't, but it does. And so trying to get that message across of, we just want you to be safe.
Now, when schools, and you don't have to mention anyone in particular, but when schools reach out, what are some of the things that stimulate them to look at adding some of this curricula, some prevention curricula into their programs?
Yeah, right now I would say the biggest concern from most of the schools I work with is vaping among youth. That is definitely a constant battle school districts are seeing, whether it's students sneaking in these vaping devices in the classroom. Majority of them are definitely doing it in the school bathrooms, and I've been hearing more and more locker rooms as a hit. So just generally the schools want that education to have those preventative measures for their students.
So like schools that can see the obvious, like a vape or something like that, or maybe smell something. Um, just an inside look. Parents and teachers don't always see all the stuff going on. Kids are pretty good at hiding this from teachers. So if we talk about what teachers and administrators see as sort of a tip of the iceberg, is that a fair analogy for the kind of stuff that's really going on with teens and middle school kids in Iowa?
I think so. And with these vaping companies, they're getting clever with these devices. Like they are purposely making more um hidden in plain sight devices. I've had teachers come up to me in the middle of class to see if I could figure out if a highlighter is a vape. It doesn't look like your standard brand name Sharpie highlighter by any means, but they have their suspicions. So sometimes I do have teachers that will come to me and be like, hey, this is happening. What can we do more to prevent this from happening?
Well, looking forward to taking a short break and coming back, continue our conversation with Savanah and learning more about some of these challenges and how to build connections with teens so we can really do things that impact them in a positive way. See you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
Malware and bots and worms, oh my. The wild, wild web can be a scary and complex place. And as our digital world expands, so too are the threats. Watch out! Trojan horse. That's why at MediaCom, we take security very seriously and monitor our networks around the clock to stop threats before they can affect you. Not today, rude kid. Not all internet is created equal. We build ours to keep you connected and protected.
Watching MC22 is now easier than ever before. All MediaCom customers can watch local programming online anytime. Go to mc22.net, click Watch MC22, and log in with your MediaCom account. Not a MediaCom cable subscriber? MediaCom internet or phone subscribers can watch too. Your local programming leader, MC22, online at mc22.net/watch.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking with Savanah about teens, a subject as challenging as can be expected unless you make a strong connection with how they are thinking. And that just happens to be one of Savanah's goals. Now, Savanah, we know in the past when we've talked to kids in middle school and high school, we'll ask them, how many of you feel like you really have a great conversation with your parents about these risky behaviors, the drugs, the vaping, and this stuff? And, maybe 1 out of 10 will raise their hand and say they do. Now, if we get their same parents in an auditorium and we ask them the same question, 9 out of 10 raise their hands and say they have that conversation. So we know, I mean, as adults, we know there's a huge disconnect between kids and parents. We also know that the more stigmatized the behavior is, or the scarier it is to parents, or even the less that anyone knows about it, the more difficult it is to have a conversation. What is this landscape like for you, and what are some of the most important connections that you build?
Yeah, so I like to tell the kids when I'm in the schools, especially, is like have these conversations with your parents. Your parents, especially the older you get, they want nothing more than to keep you safe. And so sometimes I understand those conversations are definitely a scary thing. But if you can be open and honest and be like, hey, I'm at this party, something's going on, I want to go. I guarantee your parents going to be more than happy to get you out of that situation rather than you stay and something bad happens. So parents definitely do play a key role in preventative measures as well.
Now we know that kids talk about bad stuff that happens because that's their natural curiosity and their way of exploring the world. And we know that parents don't want to talk about stuff that's scary. I mean, it's like, not saying that parents are bad, but some of these things, if we don't look at them too, maybe they won't happen. That kind of parenting is a tough thing to begin with, but the times have changed and there's many, many more predators. And we know that parents aren't really picking up on that unless something bad happens, but are kids picking up on it? Do they feel a natural skepticism and defensiveness to all this information they're getting that's trying to promote these negative behaviors?
Yeah, I definitely think these companies are smart and know what's going to attract youth. And so that's another key part we talk about a lot with the youth is like recognizing these advertisements and how they're targets, they're targeting them. And so recognizing if something looks interesting, how can we dig deeper and really read this ad and thoroughly think, why am I the target here and how I'm not going to let them take like the best of me. So with parents, I find a challenge having discussions with parents as well, because there's a lack of education, especially with things like vaping. It's relatively kind of new still. And so getting that education out to parents so they know exactly how to talk to their kids as well of this is what's going on, this is how we should watch and be careful and not feed into this industry.
Ask you a question that might be a little difficult because it's hard for me to grasp. Do you think that children are looking for guidance from their parents, and that a lack of guidance on these issues is almost a permission?
That is a tough question. To an extent, I think some kids, yes, might look to their parents for guidance. But I think as well, social media plays a key part as well too. Like youth are constantly on their phones. I see it every day. And so I have no surprise if that to an extent is a guidance for them too. If they have their influencer that they love, they might take their word more than their parents. So overall, I feel like education is definitely key in all aspects.
What do you think are some of the riskiest behaviors that young children in our schools are engaging in?
Peer pressure, I would say, is a huge thing. I see it in classrooms on a daily as well. Sometimes I think youth feels left out, and they want to fit in. And so they kind of follow their peers. That might lead them to risky behaviors like substances. It might not always be substances, but it could be a factor.
So we know that most kids don't engage in these dangerous drugs and these behaviors, but more and more are starting to. And that sort of influences the future for these peers because they're going to be buying into these problems with the people in their age group they're growing up with. Do they recognize that risk?
I don't think everyone does necessarily know. I like to point out that fact to students that majority of our youth are not using these substances, which is a great thing. However, we still need to recognize these issues so we don't go down that path as well.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break. We come back, we'll continue our conversation about what teens think about the risks they face from drugs, alcohol, and other substances. We're going to dig into some teen minds with Savanah. See you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
I'm not glitching.
I told you with our new Extreme Internet, it will be smooth streaming.
That's unbelievable.
Well, you better believe it, Missy.
I already finished streaming the whole second season of my show.
So start the third.
What the fast? That's really not frustrating.
I'll take that as a compliment.
You should.
I'm gonna get some ice cream. Do you want some?
With the drama-free reliability of Extreme Internet, you'll have to create your own. Get super fast internet with whole home Wi-Fi for as low as $24.99 a month for a year.
You told me not to talk to strangers. You told me not to cross the street without looking both ways.
You told me not to touch the stove.
You told me not to do drugs.
You told me not to drink and drive.
You gave me so many messages about how to stay safe. Why didn't you keep me safe by properly storing your gun?
The fact is, we use the internet for almost everything we do. Smart cage, feed beaker. So when the internet doesn't work the way it should, you don't work the way you should.
Kevin!
That's why more homes and businesses rely on MediaCom. Our fiber-powered network delivers 99.99% reliability. And with 650,000 miles of fiber, we have more paths of connection and more ways to avoid outages. Not all internet is created equal. We build ours for you to rely on.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're learning about what teens think of risky behaviors and why it takes an effort to get their attention when it comes to prevention. Savanah, what are some of, let's start with marijuana. What does the average teen think about marijuana that might be different than what we know in prevention?
Yeah, so I would say currently with the group that I'm teaching is seventh graders. And I find that middle school age, it's kind of split down the line 50-50, where you have youth that are very well aware of marijuana and for the most part what it entails. And then there's the other half that completely don't understand or don't even realize what it is. And so it's complicated, right? Like there's all these states more and more popping up having recreational marijuana being legalized. In Iowa, we're not that state. And so many times I find youth get confused with that, where it's like, wait, it's legal here, but it's not here. And so I'm constantly repeating myself because they get so mixed up about it. And not everyone realizes, I'm starting to find out, of the effects with marijuana and the brain development. That's like a big thing I'm hitting hard right now, teaching these youth.
Well, where are youth getting their information? Are they getting it from their parents or somewhere else?
Sometimes I do get comments. My parent told me this, but I think a lot of it is mostly online sources, probably mostly social media.
Do you find when you ask them that they trust the information they get on social media about substances? Or is that a 50-50 split too?
I feel like it's kind of a 50-50 split too. Some I think are aware that we can't trust everything on social media or even just the internet in general. You have to watch your sources, right? And then there's the other half where it's like they idolize certain companies or certain influencers and they can't see past that.
So who do you think has the greatest risk? Is it the one that thinks they know everything about marijuana, or is it the ones that don't know anything but may all of a sudden be curious?
I could see it working both ways, honestly. Again, education is key. Like you have to have that knowledge to make that decision for yourself. And I feel like I preach to a choir sometimes when I talk to these youth, because I do repeat myself a lot, but I tell them, like, the ultimate decision is in your hands. I can't be there on your shoulder and tell you what you can and can't do. You're going to make that final choice. But I hope the things you learn from me, you will have in the back of your head and you make that healthy choice of not using.
Now, if I'm a parent watching and I'm asking you a question, I'm going, do most of these kids, especially in the seventh grade, feel comfortable going to their parents to talk about these things?
They might not be comfortable, but I think that's a great headway for parents to just jump in and have that conversation. Like I said before, parents are going to want their child to stay safe. So if it takes, hey, let's talk about this, by all means, do it. I think that's a great idea.
So when you're connecting the dots for these kids that either know a lot about marijuana or know nothing, or have conversations with parents that don't have conversations with their parents, do you have sort of a checklist of things that you share with kids that says, here's some good ideas for how to do this?
Yeah. I would say middle school is the prime age to start having those conversations, especially as they go into high school and start gaining even more independence. And basically just saying, hey, let's have a conversation. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this issue, and then kind of go from there. And hopefully you have a good, strong bond at the end to build up that trusted adult.
Now, let me ask you a question, because when you say trusted adult, I've occasionally seen that as sort of an oxymoron. Are our children at that age generally growing up distrustful of older adults?
Some might, but I would like to think with my interactions,
Well, I don't call you an older adult. I see you more as a peer-based adult, because they would not see you as a threat, but I would look in the mirror and say, I would look like an older adult.
right. And I guess I would backtrack saying trusted adult, what I mean by that, and I do mention this to students as well, like, yes, you might think of a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, whoever, but I always make the point too, if you have older cousins or older siblings that you can reach out to them too. Guaranteed they want you safe as well.
That's a really great point. Well, we're going to take a short break, and Savanah, we're going to ask you to come back afterwards and share some final comments, insights, and inspiration. Maybe we'll touch a little bit on the alcohol conundrum too, because that's a tough one for kids as young as middle school. See y'all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to bed.
Oh boy.
Our back and forth. It always came back. Dad! You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Growing antsy for your favorite sports to return? Lack of quality programming got you down? Well, worry no longer, because Inside Sports is here to satisfy your cravings for the savings, your need for speed, your desire for the umpire. You get the message, right? Tune in to Inside Sports to get a deeper look at athletes on and off the mat, the track, and even the Wi-Fi? Yup, if there's action, you can bet we've got you covered on Inside Sports, only on MC22. Stream online on MC22.net and on our channel Monday and Fridays.
Welcome back. Today on Surviving Bad, we explored substance use education and prevention that focuses on youth. Let's see what final insights and inspiration Savanah has to share. Savanah, during the break, we talked about something that we didn't get to yet, which was alcohol and middle school kids. What's your sort of, from the top view of those risks and what parents need to know?
Yeah, I find when I talk to especially middle schoolers about alcohol out of all things, more and more I'm realizing it's kind of a modeled behavior. They definitely will share stories of their family and what they've seen or what their parents' choice of drink is. And it's like, all right, we're gonna have this conversation of just because your parents are doing it doesn't mean you should be doing it as well.
Yeah, and if parents are doing it, it's going to be hard for them to preach to their kids about not doing it.
Yep. And so I like to bring the point at a middle school age level, especially, it's like they are adults, they can make their choices, but at your current age, these are the risks associated with using alcohol, and you have to remember that.
Now, is the landscape changing in terms of who the cool kids are? I mean, we go back to in the old days, the cool kids were the rebels, the one that, maybe got in a little bit of trouble. But we see it seems to be a shift. Is there coolness sort of revolving around a better quality lifestyle and a better world and all this kind of stuff too?
I think so. And I think we are starting to get on the flip side talking more and more about mental health. When I have those conversations with students, they can tell me basically all the mental health things they're struggling with, whether it's anxiety, depression, and then I'm like, okay, so let's now dive in and talk about how we can take care of ourselves without resorting to any sort of substance. We want to take care of you. How can we do that in a healthy way?
Now, is mental health, I know from my point of view, we never even knew what that was when we were middle school kids. How about you? When you grew up, did you have those conversations, or is this new for you too?
No, this is new for me too. I would say by the time I reached college, I remember having more of those discussions in college. I don't remember a ton of having them in grade school whatsoever.
Yeah, it must be hard to get kids an understanding of how much the world has really changed and why adults would be scared.
Yes, and um I think the part that makes me happy that youth are starting to realize it more is they'll say things to me like, well, if I got a bad grade on a test or whatever, what self-care can I do to help myself out? And I'm like, we never used that word when I was little, self-care. Like, I'm glad you're recognizing that. That's a great thing. Like, yes, let's take care of you.
Yeah, it is sort of a strange world today where we think happiness is something external, not internal.
Mhm.
We don't give children permission to choose happiness. We structure a world around them where they have to get certain boxes in certain orders to be acknowledged as being okay. And maybe that's one of the side effects of this mental health thing is that they're starting to say, listen, you're giving us this landscape. I don't feel good about it, but I don't, usually when we look at issues that children have, if they have confusion or fear, it's because we just didn't teach them.
Right.
Is that how you feel as well?
I I do agree with that because if I was struggling in school, my first thought was, well, I don't want to let my parents down, which I'm sure is very similar to an extent for these kids still. But I think they have better skill sets that hopefully they're learning of how to manage those emotions. For me, I feel like I was the type, especially to just completely shut down and not necessarily do something for myself. So I'm happy we are teaching our kids, like, okay, if we have a bad day, if we're feeling something, what can we do to make ourselves feel at least a little better? We don't expect you to be happy right away, but what can we do to get your mood boosted up?
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's so important for young professionals like you and others to be working with kids because the world has changed, the landscape's changed, and they're going to need all the help they can get to find that core of happiness and healthy lifestyle that avoids the risks of these predators we see trying to push some of these dangerous substances on them. Thank you so much for being here today, Savanah, and thank you all for watching us. Check out our website at healthyiowa.org and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. I'm MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.